It's so ironical because when I was growing up, I was from this family, which was a business family, and it had its own set of ups and downs. So growing up, I always thought that I needed financial stability.
Right.
And that was my driver. So I was very clear between me and my brother. We would always have this discussion that I always do a job because I like the stability. I don't like this fluctuation.
How do you self-manage yourself through that down?
So in fact, when I started, just had this great idea and this vision to build a platform in the mid-market.
You always put the money on the jockey, not the horse, right? So suddenly it became
real. And I felt, oh God, now I really have to do this, right? So that's how it started.
Welcome to Circle. Hi everyone, I'm Jaya Mehrotra.
And I'm Gayatri Rangachari Shah. I'd like to introduce to you Shivani Bhasin Sachdeva, founder and CEO of India Alternatives. Shivani, I've had the privilege of knowing Shivani for a very long time. We're old friends. She has been in the private equity and finance world for over 20 years. She has been named Private Equity Leader of the Year in 2024. And we're delighted to have you with us, Shivani.
Thank you so much, Gayatri. It's such a pleasure to be here. And especially with this group of sort of wonderful women. I've done so many interviews and similar sort of things, but not in this format. So I'm really excited to be here. Yeah, thanks, Shilpa, Jaya.
I would like to introduce Shilpa. Shilpa is the CEO and founder of Fitistan. She's also a co-creator for Women Leadership Circle. She's a trailblazer and a great friend of mine. And in the last 1 year, she's been a supporter in creating the community of WLC, which is what has brought us together today. So welcome, Shilpa.
Thank you so much, Jaya, for the support always and your kind words.
Shivani, I'd like to begin by just asking you, you obviously had this storied career in finance in New York, and you could have stayed the course and risen through the ranks of a global multinational or major financial services firm. But you chose to take the plunge and found your own company. What drove you to do that?
Thanks, Gayatri. In fact, I was speaking at my alma mater, Wharton, last week, and I was literally asked the same exact question. So I'm going to give the answer. It was 2005, and I had attended a Wharton symposium in Mumbai. And I was very inspired by listening to Amitabh Kant about the various things that were happening in India. And the growth that was going to happen over the next 10 or 15 years. I was very, very, excited about backing companies, and I wanted to be in a market which was growing and vibrant. I also wanted to do something great for my country. I'd been away for 14 years. I'd sort of, been in New York. I'd lived that life. It was wonderful. But after a while, I did have a pang of saying, I want to come back home. I want to build something in India. And so I think that was one of the things. And I heard that speech. I was really inspired. I went back to New York. I thought a little bit about it. Of course, I was young, idealistic, silly. I turned in my resignation and moved.
Where were you working at the time?
I was working for a large private equity fund called Lightyear Capital. It was started by a billionaire who had started Paine Webber from scratch and sold it to UBS. We managed $2 billion. And I came back in, abruptly turned in my resignation and, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed moved to Mumbai without knowing a single soul here.
And the rest is history.
And the rest is, the four of us chatting here, I guess.
Awesome. Yeah. So, Shilpa, you've also recently become a founder for Fitistan. Tell me a little more about that. What led you to start Fitistan?
It's so ironical because when I was growing up, I was from this family, which was a business family, and it had its own set of ups and downs. So growing up, I always thought that I needed financial stability.
Right.
And that was my driver. So I was very clear between me and my brother. We would always have this discussion that I always do a job because I like the stability. I don't like this fluctuation. And my brother would always say that I'm going to be a businessman. I'm going to be my own boss. And as things would have it, so I did a job, so life took a turn from need, survival, comfort, and then luxury. And then I started asking myself this question that what next? I can't just live my life just thus far. So what was the purpose of my life? And what is it that I want to do next? Because I don't want to chase money anymore, but I want to chase purpose. And that's how Fitistan happened, honestly. And I wanted to start a company which could make a difference.
Thanks. Both of you said that you took that risk and a leap of faith. So I'm quite interested in the beginning, the first 12, 15 months of starting. How do you self-manage yourself through that doubt and the risk that you're taking? Because you've left something very secure and plunged yourself into something which is unknown.
Yeah, and did you have doubts like, oh my God, what did I just do? Those initial kind of as you call it buyer's remorse.
Completely. I did every day. So in fact, when I started, just had this great idea and this vision to build a platform in the mid-market. I thought that India was ready for it.
Define mid-market for us.
So mid-market would be companies that have an established product market fit, that have gone through the venture funding, but aren't, mature. So let's say if you were to put some numbers around it, typically the businesses that we would back would be anywhere between 50 crores of revenue to, let's say, 300 or 400 crores of revenue. Of course, we can sometimes do larger ones and sometimes do smaller if they're growing very, very rapidly. But this is typically where we invest. My first investor, quite by chance, it was a friend of a friend who said, go and meet this individual. He's talking about doing something. You want to do something entrepreneurial. And so I went and met him. I made the pitch. And to my shock and horror, he turned around and said he would like to back me.
Wow. Amazing. You always put the money on the jockey, not on the horse, right?
So suddenly it became real.
And of course, I'm a woman, as all of us are, and we know, what we do really well and sometimes how we hold ourselves back, right? And, this gentleman said, I'd love to back you and I'd love to put this much money. And I couldn't believe the kind of money he was talking about. And I was horrified. And I said, but wait a minute, I'm 5 months pregnant. That was the only thing that came out of my mouth. Instead of saying, oh my God, this is so great. And sort of, jumping across the table, shaking his hand and saying in passing, oh, by the way, I'm also starting a family. I felt the need to sort of throw that out there and put like a big red circle around it. And, I got the funniest response. This person was not a feminist. I don't think he's, thought about women's rights. He's just a very hard-nosed businessman. And he said, oh, congratulations. And then he went back to the deck. And I was totally taken aback. And I went back that evening and I met my husband and I said, again, classic woman, right? A man would go home and say, hey, chill the champagne. I just, but I went home and I said, a really weird thing happened to me today, right?
I got someone to back me.
I got someone to back me.
What do I do now?
What is this? And then he turned around and said, congratulations. And I felt, oh God, now I really have to do this, right? So that's how it started. But yeah, there were many times when I said, oh my God, this was insane. Why did I leave my cushy life in New York? Why did I do this? There were moments like that.
So you actually had 2 babies at the same time. You had twins.
I had twins. In fact, my son was born and I got a license literally the next day. I didn't start fundraising till, much later in the year. So I got one baby,
And what did if you could share with how big was that initial fund that you started off with?
So the initial fund, we raised 250 crores. We could deploy less because in those days, RBI didn't allow banks and financial services institutions to be more than 10% of your fund. But we did raise 250. And we, so you talked about the naysayers and sort of all of that. When I started, I went and spoke to 3 people because that's, again, a classic path, right? Many people say as a woman, go and speak to mentors. Like that's the directive, right? So I went and spoke to 3 people who I trusted. And all of them, what do you think they said to me? Should I start or not? They said no. They said no.
I can totally relate to that.
They said no.
Sorry, can I ask you, were they men or women?
They were all men because I didn't have any women to reach out to. I'm one of the first few women that have started their own fund, at the GP level.
And so they all said no.
They all said no. And, for various reasons, one said, you're never going to be able to raise money in India. You don't have the relevant experience in India. The second said, you're never going to get a team that's very stable and stays the course because, in order to build a platform, that's what you need. The third said, you're not going to be able to, find companies to invest in. Different reasons, but they all said no.
And happily, you've proven them wrong.
luckily, I'm a Mount Holyoke grad, and I think we learned pretty early on at Mount Holyoke to drown out the voices. And so, they all said no. I was like, okay, this is information. But I did have voices that said yes. I mean, my own being the loudest of them, I guess. And so I ignored that.
So one of the common things that happen when you meet this discouragement, it's from strong leaders, there is this rise of imposter syndrome in us. And my question is for both of you, because, you've all taken leap of faith. How do you self-manage this imposter syndrome? And also, since you deal with founders, do you find the imposter syndrome more present in women, or is it a common theme?
I'm just going to go back to my journey.
Yeah.
So when I started Fitistan, I just knew that I wanted to make a difference. That was the premise. It was purposeful. And we realized that everybody wants to be disease-free. And at a macro level, everybody knows what needs to be done. Correct. That you work out every day, you eat right, you sleep right. And, at least at a physical level, you're fit. But most people find it very difficult to stay consistent and motivated. So we thought that here we have a problem that needs a solution. So let's just first experiment and understand what could that solution be. So we started forming communities and we started experimenting. So we would curate different challenges, which could be 1 minute to several days. And we realized that the results were miraculous. To me, it was miraculous because I'm not from a fitness, wellness background. I was just getting the business part of it in. And of course, my business partner is somebody who is a doctor, understands fitness. But I was shocked. So we said, okay, as a businesswoman, let's go make an app. So we found this really amazing app-making company who was charging us, hundreds of dollars by the hour. And we said that, no, since we are starting businesses, we should not be penny wise, pound foolish. Let's go invest in, find the best guys to make the app. What were we making at the app? We had no idea by then. Yeah. So, for 2 months, we kept discussing that, okay, this is how the app should be. This is what the feature should be. Only realizing that I had spent like about 35 lakhs with nothing, like zilch. And I felt like such a stupid person. I thought I was a failure. And I can never forget this incident. I was sitting and crying. I get goosebumps when I say it. I'm like, shit, this is the first time that I've started my business and I've failed completely. And then what had happened was this friend of mine told me that, Shilpa, why are you making the app? The app has to be phase 3 or phase 4 of your journey. First, you focus on building your product. And in your case, the product is your community. So you should focus all your energies in building your community. And once you know what you want to provide them, that's when you build the app. So that's when I came back home and I said, this is great, but it's also like a slap on my face that I've failed. And then Karan told me, Shilpa, you should be thankful to God that you realized this, because no institute in the world would have taught you this at a 35 lakh value. Yeah. This will probably be like a rounding of error 2 years down the line or some years down the line when you look back and you will say that, oh my God, I felt like a failure for something so small. And that completely shifted my mindset. So a lot of times we feel that, oh my God, I failed and this is the end of it. But I now look back and I am so thankful that my friend called it out and my husband kind of gave me that confidence. He told me that you pay $30,000 per child and your kids go to American school in grade 7. What are they learning so much? And you're okay to pay that 35 lakhs there. And you're so...
Lovely perspective.
And you're so... You're cursing yourself for having spent that money. You've learned so much. Yeah. It's not failing. It's learning, which no institute can teach you. So I think now that personality shift has happened. So whenever there is a failure now, I just quickly want to shift that lens and see, okay, what was the learning?
Right.
Amazing.
So, through failure comes success.
Amazing.
But to follow up on Jaya's point, did you both at any point, because obviously, women tend to suffer from this a lot, no matter how experienced they are, this concept of this imposter syndrome. So when you had this kind of, at that time, thinking I've just spent this giant amount of money on something that is just never going to come to fruition, or in your case, Shivani, where maybe you took some bets that didn't pan out or something, have you all experienced this feeling of this imposter syndrome, and do you continue to experience it, or do you feel like there's a point where you do overcome it?
I think that you do experience imposter syndrome, especially in the beginning. I don't know if it's imposter syndrome as much as shock and awe as to, oh God, what have I done? And the questioning, right? So I was listening to Shilpa very intently, and what was interesting, and sometimes I hear this with women founders, they talk about their failures. and what they've learned, and that's amazing. But they need to talk more about how much they've achieved with that. So the fact that you've already achieved so much with a paltry amount of 35 lakhs is amazing, right? And to bring it back to your earlier question about women founders versus male founders, I find that women founders often talk about risk mitigation in a meeting. They always tell me the money's safe with me because I'm going to do this. Whereas male founders never mention that. They talk about how big the business is going to be. So when I'm in a meeting with a woman founder and she starts going down the risk path, I sort of interject and I say, I'd like to know how big this can be. And with men, I say, what can go terribly wrong? So I usually do that.
But I so agree with this because it's just the way men and women are
way we are wired. It's just the way we are wired, right?
I mean, I have completely agreed because, every men founder or a successful founder I've met, they're only talking about the large picture.
Exactly.
They're only talking about big successes.
Exactly.
They don't think small. And I think we are constantly thinking short term. And I'm not trying to generalize this, but just we have big dreams, but the risk-taking ability.
That's absolutely right. So coming back to the imposter syndrome point, sometimes it's there and sometimes it isn't there. Sometimes it isn't there because you're not gunning for the fences as much as you should. You're sort of over-prepared for that role. I can do this much, but I'll just do this little and then I'll prove myself. Right? So that constant needing to prove yourself again and again, right? Rather than saying, hey, of course I can do it.
We were discussing imposter syndrome, and the other counter to imposter syndrome is trying to prove ourselves. And all of us kind of came out of the colleges in late 90s, early 2000. Our parents brought up to this idea of equal world, but the world was a little different than we anticipated. And then to compensate for it, we try to 2x. And I've met so many founders, and including me. I'm doing 2 jobs right now. I'm parenting my daughter into college, and I find that women are trying to prove a lot. Well, if they might not have an imposter syndrome, but then they are doing 2x. And look at Shilpa's journey. She's a Fitistan, founder of a Fitistan. She's a co-creator at WLC. She serves on the advisory board of another community. She has a brilliant son. And, look at all that you do. So, where is this energy coming, or where is this need to prove coming from us that we're doing so much?
To be very honest, Jaya, I don't think it's coming out of nowhere. I feel like there's such few of us in many of the cohorts that we belong to that I feel like we do have this sense of responsibility to speak up a little bit more or to show the numbers a little bit more just so that we can shine the torch for the others to come into that very small cohort. I mean, I've always been in an industry where I've literally, very often the only woman in so many discussions and so many boardrooms. I go into the boardroom, again, I'm the only woman there. And, and I come in saying, I'm going to deliver 5x the value of the next person, not 2x, right? Because I don't want someone to think that they should get a woman board member, So I don't think this idea that we need to prove ourselves 2 or 3x is frankly coming out of nowhere. I think there is a reality that there's few of us in the positions that the 4 of us are in. And so there is this pressure, right, to demonstrate that we can perform, that we can achieve, that in fact we are there for a whole host of other reasons besides being a woman.
So Shivani, you are in private equity, and I read somewhere that only 2.4% of founders are women in private equity, which is, compared to the rest of the finance world, it's, totally abysmal, of course. And I know that you have some personal commitments that you want to do with your own fund. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
So, private equity is a strange animal because even within finance, it's an area which is completely male-dominated.
Why is that?
So I think one of the reasons is there is this false narrative that, because, the private equity is often considered the ultimate buck stops here because it's your bucks on the table, right? And I think there is this narrative that to be in that position, you must have come out of a, hunter-gatherer mindset, right? The alpha male, somebody who thinks that the top job in some ways it's, considered, it's sort of a top job, right? So the top job belongs to a man because he has evolved out of the hunter-gatherer. It's very aggressive. It's very intense. It's very competitive. And I'm not shying away from the fact that sometimes it is aggressive. It is intense. It is competitive. But many other fields are intense, competitive, and aggressive. Shilpa, starting a company is very, very daunting, right?
Absolutely.
What about like being a doctor? Is that not aggressive, intense, competitive? But somehow this job has not attracted women because the narrative is very, very strong. Whereas most of what I do, or much of what I do, is not this swashbuckling, my way or the highway. It's not like that at all. It's about building relationships. It's a lot about listening to what the founder, would like, adding value in, after you listen, you can actually add so much more value because you can add value on the key drivers that the founder and you, let's say, would like to focus on and would like to take the company to the next level. So, negotiation, all of these things are not, they are not, my way or the highway at all. And I think women are naturally very well inclined for private equity. I would argue that women are beautifully inclined.
That's very interesting because you really do not get that. That is not the narrative that comes out at all.
Almost narrative feeling that it is because of the exact thing that she said, that women only try to mitigate risk.
Correct.
So they have the ability to really be very, very good with their finances in terms of they have a natural, I think it's in their DNA.
Yeah.
But the fact that they are not really risk takers, they don't want to get into this.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if they can give that many X the return.
Yeah. But the funny thing is, my job is actually about pricing risk.
Right.
So my job is to say, hey, these are the so many risks here. I need to deliver at least 3 or 4x on the fund, but I got to price the risk right.
Correct.
Right? And so women make wonderful fund managers because they come in not saying, I know everything.
Correct.
Because then you don't know how to price the risk. Right?
And it's interesting because, Shilpa, I know you work with an almost all-female team.
Yes.
And Shivani, you...
I was not aware of that.
Founder, like my co-founder.
I didn't know that.
Everybody else is a female.
Incredible.
I've seen her office and it's like a room full of women.
Shilpa.
Yeah. So the idea was, like, even with WLC, I don't even know whether it was a conscious decision. It was somewhere in the subconscious maybe. But now when I see WLC in its full, when I see so many women, they are like force of nature.
Yeah.
They can multitask to a level and they're so efficient. It's just so easy to work with them.
Right.
Even with a few hours, they deliver so much.
Did you want all women or did that happen organically?
It just happened organically. But now I just feel that it's working so well for us that we might. So I'm not like honestly gender biased per se, but I just feel that the team works amazingly well.
That's amazing.
But so I wanted to ask actually this whole idea of team building.
Yeah.
When you both started out, you, Shivani, of course, were a total outlier because you're the only woman in the room 99% of the time, let's say.
Yeah.
And for you too, Shilpa, starting out, without necessarily have built a business before, how did you go about sort of attracting talent, building your teams?
I can start. When I started, I'd read a very interesting book that said, when you're scaling a business, always have your first or second hire with people who have an extremely different skill set to yours. As you grow in scale, you can hire people who are more similar to you in terms of skill set. So the first few hires that I had were different to me in every way, and they were men also. So they weren't women. As time went on, we hired more women. We have, a woman on our board of the asset management company. We have a senior director who's a woman. We have women at all different levels. But when I started, it was like a couple of men. And then.
And how big are you now? How many employees?
So, for a mid-market private equity firm, you will never have more than, let's say, 10 to 20 people. So we're at, roughly 10 right now, which is a great size. Right. Yeah.
So one of the key things, so I'm going to answer this in 2 parts. Part number 1 being that how did I find my team was from my community. So like I mentioned that we went on to build our community. So it was just me and my co-founder first. And then when the communities, we started identifying 2 things, problem areas and how to solve them, and people who were helping us solve those problems. And those people became our team members. So it happened very organically. And I'm really thankful. And somehow these were all women, although our community is not women-centric. Our community has everybody. But we realized that a lot of these women would come forward, step up, try to help us solve a problem. And that's when we offered them a job. And because we were a startup, we had, I'm not very proud to say this because I do want to pay them right, but I just felt that they didn't even negotiate that much. They came at a very good value for money. I mean, so it really worked out as a win-win for all of us. The second thing now that I've learned, and this was closely watching Karan build his company and something that I've learned from him, that when you're building a team and when you're recruiting somebody, there are always three things that you need to take care of. One is whether that person has the skill. Second, whether that person is hardworking or not. And the third is attitude. Now, if the person is hardworking but does not have the skill but has the right attitude, you can still train. You can train the skill. But if the person is hardworking and is not hardworking but has the skill and has the right attitude, you can still hire them because they'll figure it out because of the attitude. But if the person has great skill, amazingly hardworking, but does not have the right attitude, please do not hire.
Yeah.
Because then no matter how good they are, they will not adjust, adapt. They will not deliver. So I think, these are my few learnings building my team.
Right.
I think skills, I believe, while I coach people, that skills can be developed, but attitude cannot be changed. Yeah. So I know both of you have been talking about hiring teams and scaling up. So one of the questions I want to know is that one of the things we want to do at WLC is to support women to scale from 1 to 100x. In the last 5 to 10 years, a lot of female entrepreneurs have come. But where the challenge happens is how to go from 10x to 100x. And what do you see as a mindset required to manage risk, to hire teams, to just scale up from 10 to the 100x? Because for us to see more females at the top, we need to see that 100x happen. We have this great founder, Falguni, who's been able to take a company to a few $1 billion, but we don't have many names like that. So what do you think is the mindset required to scale to that size?
And also to follow up on that, Shivani, I'd love to also get some data from you on what you are doing on that front.
Yeah.
So actually, one of our investment themes in the fund is women-oriented consumption, because we find it completely insane that people aren't funding this market enough. And we think it's probably one of the largest markets in the country. So if women control 60 to 80% of all consumption decisions, then the market in India is at least $1.5 trillion, right?
Right.
And so we have had many successful investments by backing this investment theme. So one of our earlier investments was in this company called Enamor, which became de facto the leading lingerie player in the country that we sold to Advent and so on. Since there aren't enough women founders, we believe, there's still such a paucity, right? So what we've done is we've gone out and we have made a commitment to say that over time, our portfolio, at least 1/3 of our portfolio will have women in the very senior management levels, right? And so to answer your question now, Jaya, what does that entail? I think a lot of times it entails sort of a combination of three things. One is equipping yourself with the right skill set. That's the easy part. That's the part where you can actually have sessions, you can have training and all of that. The second bit, I think, which is more important, is a good, healthy boost of self-confidence. Many women are equipped. Many women, can do the job, but they hold themselves back or they think that they need that little bit extra. And so, we've hosted a whole bunch of events. One, of course, with WLC, I remember at the start of the year, yeah. And so the idea really for those events is to bring a lot of women from our ecosystem, from our portfolio companies, who may be at mid-level, at the mid-level, and aspiring to very senior level positions, to hear from other women about their journey, to get that boost of self-confidence. I mean, frankly, one of the missions of WLC, I think, right? So,
But we have a terrible leaking pipeline in India. Our workforce participation rates for women are just abysmal and really not commensurate with the growth trajectory of the country, the economy. What does one do? Because we have also in India, Indian women face very specific social pressures.
Yes.
Vis-a-vis childcare, elder care, being able to perform, quote unquote, as wives and mothers and all these social roles that are very important in this country, in addition to holding down successful professional careers. in a way that I think sometimes, other societies may not have those kinds of pressures, or have different pressures. How does one stem this leaking pipeline, Shivani? Do you face, and Jaya, I would love to, even with you as a coach, to understand, are there people looking to, sort of leave the workforce, and then you have to counsel them?
This is a wonderful question and a very pertinent question, Gayatri. So I was actually giving a talk at Grant Thornton. I was addressing most of Grant Thornton offices, sort of around the world. And I asked them this question, and there were a lot of men in the room, of course, and I said,
just tell everyone, the Grant Thornton, just for our audience.
It's a very premier sort of audit and financial services firm. It's considered, one of the big 5 or big 6, whatever. And one of the questions that I asked, now I specifically asked the men in the room. I said, how many of you would be unhappy if you had a more balanced life, if you were to be able to go home a little bit earlier and spend time with your family? Is that something that you would like? Mm-hmm. Almost every man in the room put up his hand. So now we are talking about, right, where we say we are part of the society where it's okay if men stay late, because a woman is expected to stay at home. Most of the men don't want that either, right? And so we need, in order for the change, we need to have a lot of men working with us. And, in fact, one of my investors, IFC, is doing a whole bunch of stuff on the gender front. And, they asked me to nominate a few colleagues from my firm, and I nominated men. And the men are very excited about it. They're very excited about gender balance, because guess what? It allows them a little bit of room as well, So I think it's a problem. I think we need to work with young people, with, across the board, like men and women, to help solve this. Because until we have a change, like you said, there's societal pressure. And until the expectations change at home, it's going to be very difficult to plug this leaking, bucket.
Right. Yeah. Jaya, have you experienced this with the people that you coach?
Of course, I think one of the things that is happening is that people are now looking to think if 9 to 5 job is actually a broken concept, or it's going to get outdated. In fact, the LinkedIn CEO said that in 10 years, 9 to 5 jobs might become a thing of the past. Because ultimately, for a woman, 9 to 5 is the worst time. Her children go to school at 9, they come back at home around 1 and 2. And she actually is productive around maybe in the evening. And for me, I've coached engineers, I've coached very senior women leaders. And what I saw is that something happened with COVID. Suddenly, 3 times a week, you're at home. You're there to pick up your child from school. And I remember 10 years back when I was going through a separation and I wanted to be home. I wanted flexibility. I had to take a salary cut. Somewhere I think there is a little bit in this COVID thing. But
it's a little complex.
It is more complex.
The women in the portfolio companies, when I talk to them offline, they say, we hate working from home.
Yes.
Because this is when we work from home, we are expected to be completely on it. Yeah. And it's difficult to multitask. It's exhausting. It's nice to be able to be tunnel visioned, right? It's nice to be able to sit in your office and say, now this is my time for work.
Right? And actually, just to follow up on that point, in India, this is especially true because a lot of people want to leave their homes to come to an office and not have, lots of other home demands on them.
Women in my portfolio companies all tell me that. Yeah. But they tell me one-on-one. Yeah. They say we want to go to the office.
Joint families, and then, your in-laws expect you to...
Correct.
When you're at home, right?
Correct.
They don't get it. Like, if you're not going to office...
I still have it.
Yeah.
If I'm on a board call, my son will happily knock on the door.
Yeah.
Like, Mama's in a board meeting.
Of course.
Correct, exactly. But Shilpa, you have an all-women's team, and I know you're obviously a startup, but have you found that has anyone wanted to leave? Have you faced this issue of a leaking pipeline?
Both types.
Right.
So I have had one, I remember one of our first hires, she said, I told her because I was paying her in my mind like really little. So I didn't, and she used to live very far. So I told her that, listen, you can do work out of home, you can come to office just twice a week and we could use that time to collaborate, don't worry. And, she insisted, she said, no, I cannot work out of home. I have to come to office and work. So that was a choice she made. And of course, then I have this other bunch of women who prefer working out of home because they want, they live far. So the commute time is too much for them. But having said that, now we've also come, we are of a mindset that we want to give flexibility. So we made it very clear in our organization that you work at your convenience, we trust you, we have faith in you, but meet us twice a week compulsorily so that we collaborate. So we ensure that we are in office twice a week at least. And it's worked for us so far. It's not stopped us from thinking about scaling up or thinking large. So somehow I think that there's always a solution. My bigger worry to add on and my observation is that I know so many women around me who are extremely talented. They have all the resources in the world. They're educated. They have the qualification. They're intelligent enough. But because they have, or maybe as a family, they have reached a certain social status that they do not want to go back to work. Because if they go back to work after such a long break, they might not get the pay scale or the designation which is in congruence to their social status, and then they decide not to work at all. They feel horrible about it, and there's so much that they could contribute, but I've realized that it also holds them back. They're not coming out and working. They're just happily, but they are at home, and they are looking after their kids, and they're attending kiddie parties or making social appearances. But I know for a fact that they can do so much more, but they are holding themselves back because of that social status.
I think that's very important, very valid point, because I've seen it with some of my classmates at Wharton and Harvard, right? Highly educated women, same thing. And highly educated women tend to be married to highly educated men. And guess what? While they were, they took that break, their partners didn't. And so then the partners are at a certain level, so they don't need to work. And then they feel like they don't want, if something is less than optimal, they don't want to take it.
I mean, the statistics are really abysmal. I think it's like 10% of like HB, Harvard Business School, women graduates, I think after like a 10-year period of graduating are working. Because of this issue. Because reintegrating into the workforce, if you feel you're at a certain position, but that some obviously you have been left behind because you took that break, it's very difficult and very tricky. So
actually, part of me becoming a founder was a solution to this problem. Because, one of the things you do is, as women, when you take a break or you kind of take a pivot in the career, and I want to know about your pivot, is that when I was finding that I can't do a 9-to-5 job anymore, I became a leadership coach. It allowed me hybrid. I did take some step back on my income. And I think one of my friends also did the same. She became a consultant. Yeah, because entrepreneurship gives you the flexibility to grow at a certain pace.
It does.
Yeah, and you know that you will take the risk of having some economic cut down right now, but you will then build up in 10 years more than you would have ever done. So actually becoming a founder becomes a solution to this problem in a way, actually.
The problem is fear of failure. A lot of women don't want to do this, and I'm going off track, but I really want to speak about one experience that I've had. And this is when I wasn't really working full time. My son was playing chess. We were in Russia, Sochi. He was playing under 7. We were playing the World Championship. And there was this, usually in chess, it's a 9-game, you have to have 9 games to play the entire tournament. And the first 4 or 5 games are the easier ones because you get paired, then depending on the strength, you come up on the top, right? The game 5 to 6 is when it becomes really hard. That's when you're struggling, the stress, suddenly, it's so much more on the table. Now, my son, Kush, was playing, this was his second game. He was playing against a guy who was completely unknown. Like usually when you've been playing for so long, you know who your usual candidates are. So I wasn't even paying attention to him. Now the game's gone on for 5 hours. My son is 6 years old, okay? And I'm just wondering what is going on because everybody else has left from the tournament hall. And he was playing against this, boy from Uzbekistan, and the arbiter there was also from Uzbekistan. So it's his mother, me, and suddenly the arbiter comes and he's screaming at that mom. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but I could figure that maybe my son was in a winning position. He was in a losing position. I mean, I wanted to believe that. After 10 minutes, my son walks out, expressionless, zero expression. I can't make out whether he's won or he's lost, right? So he comes out and I'm like, you won, right? He's like, no. But I said, but I thought you were winning. So he said, yeah, but that was 10 minutes ago and I made a mistake and I lost. And I was like, this is game number 2. How could you lose? Completely to an unknown person. This is world championship. Like, what are we talking? Now, I'm trying to be calm and I'm like, no, I shouldn't be doing this. But I'm like, this can't be real. This can't be true. And I go back to the room at about 9 p.m. when I thought I've put him to sleep. I call my husband and I'm like, how could he do this? This is crazy. How could he? And then, there's a tap on my shoulder. And he's like, Mom, the game is over. I have another game to play tomorrow. Can we please move on? I think
so
that
amazing.
Was a completely transformative moment of my life.
And he was 6 years old.
Amazing.
By the way, he went and won that world championship.
That's amazing.
So I just realized that we get so concerned about
and caught up, and we get caught up.
But you need to look at the larger picture.
Absolutely.
So he at 6 years old knew that he had the tournament in mind and one game didn't matter. He had to win the tournament. And I was so stuck. So what I'm trying to say is that a lot of times the fear of failure is so hard, and even a small failure makes us quit. But you have to look at the larger picture.
Absolutely.
And once that transformation happens, you go on to lead so many things.
So I just want to follow up with that. That's such a thank you for sharing that, because it's a really amazing sort of illustrative story of how children can teach us.
Yes.
But, our whole lives were programmed, from the day, especially in India, you're sort of, you have to have academic success, and then you have to get into the right college, and then you get a job, and then, you have this financial security and all that. So it's always just a series of building blocks. No one's really planning, like, the big picture. Like, you don't wake up saying, I'm going to be a CEO one day, or I'm going to be the president of India, prime minister of India, or whatever, right? It's sort of, life is a series of steps that get you to a certain point. And I think what happens with women is that, of course, our biological clock is racing against, is competing with our professional clock. So that is where we all sort of have these struggles. Some of us are able to stay the course, others are not. I mean, I certainly pivoted from finance to, media, to journalism, basically because of choices that I wanted to make in terms of my own lifestyle and work-life balance, which back when we were, sort of in that phase, 20 years ago, work-life balance was not even a thing. You worked till like 3 a.m., then you went home and you came back at like 8 a.m. And that was just the nature of the beast in finance and consulting, at least in those days. Now, of course, we're much more mindful, and thankfully so. But, when you make that pivot, and you, Jaya, made that pivot, and you talked about the fact that, becoming a founder gives you that flexibility, even though initially it may not give you the financial remuneration or security you might need. It's exactly the same with me. I mean, obviously there's no comparison between a finance pay cut and being a journalist. There is no money in journalism. I'm just putting that out there. But you get a lot of satisfaction if that is where you are so inclined. And of course, I've got tremendous flexibility. So, I think these are these choices that we make. And we have, as long as you are very clear about what your goals are, and you keep talking about purpose, a purpose-driven life. I think, with Shivani, her passion is private equity. With you, your passion is trying to help others through coaching. With Shilpa, it is hoping to make the country fitter and stronger. And for me, amplifying stories and people's sort of voices. I mean, I think if you find your purpose, you will get tremendous satisfaction, and maybe it'll come with financial security. It may not come with the best financial security, but you know that you're living, sort of a very kind of a fulfilled life.
Yes, I agree. And that's the thing I find in common theme in women. I think somewhere in the mid parts of their careers, they become very purpose-driven. It's no more about the money. It's no more about the career ladder. It's about driving. And I see that in Shilpa. What she's doing is totally about purpose. WLC, I think, for all of us is about purpose. And is that something you see, that when you see founders between maybe even male and female, that women are more purpose-driven, and that's where they get the energy to do all that they have to do at that stage of life? I definitely want to know.
I'm not so sure it's only women, to be honest. I think it's more of a stage of life, to be very honest, where you suddenly say, hey, I've had blinders on and I've only been doing this certain thing. And now I want to do more. I want to have more of an impact. So I'm curious about that. I have not witnessed a gender sort of difference there, or gender aspect there, but certainly there may be.
Yeah, of course. I think every entrepreneur out there is coming from a place of purpose, because they're trying to solve a problem. Yeah. I feel that most women take on entrepreneurship role later in life, the second stage of their lives.
Yeah, that's true.
Why does that happen?
I think that's what we were talking about earlier about risk taking, right? Because entrepreneurship is the ultimate risk taking, right? And so the ability to drown out other people's voices. I think as women, a lot of us say we want to listen to everybody. We've been told that since we were, little girls, right? And so when you're an entrepreneur, you have to know how to zone things out.
Yeah. Don't speak up. Don't attract attention to yourself. These are the messages that were given.
To being an entrepreneur, right? So as an entrepreneur, you have to speak up. You have to be heard. You have to say, I know you told me I can't do this, but guess what? 2 other people have told me that I can, and I think I can, so I'm going to, right?
I also wanted to pivot and ask you both about fundraising. We touched upon it a little bit, Shilpa, where you talked about, sort of having to eat the cost of building your app and all that. But Shivani, you, of course, were very shocked and awed that you got the initial check while you were 5 months pregnant. And I know you have big ambitions for your next fund. Please talk to us about that. But how easy or difficult has it been to fundraise for the both?
So I'll tell you, when I started my journey, I had shock and awe when it started. Then, of course, and I think here is the benefit of being a woman, right? A lot of my peers, all my peers were men, of course, and they were all chasing money from the same source, which was international markets. Now, as you mentioned, I had twins, I had a little boy, and I didn't want to leave him and run away and be, traveling everywhere. And I was very clear that I wanted to build a wonderful platform, which meant, and if you look at the best mid-market platforms globally, they're always backed by local institutions. Local institutions in our country were not investing in private equity. So it was a Herculean task in many ways because first, I was a woman wanting to set up my own private equity firm. That itself was hilarious even to me. And then second...
You had to convince them.
Second, I said I want institutional capital. And third, I wanted from people that have not invested in private equity before. So this was, to cut a long story short, I did manage to get 250 crores. We can delve into that or whatever. And, what I'm really, really sort of proud and excited about is across 2 funds now, I have 17 of India's top institutions that have come in and backed India Alternatives. And, of course, in the last fund, we raised money from IFC as well. Very proud and humble that, Eiffel Wealth, now 361, was an early investor in our fund. So I think that's been an amazing journey in terms of staying the course.
And now you're raising 1,000.
And now I'm going to be launching a 3rd fund early next year.
Which is how big?
I think around 1,000 crores.
Wow.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Number.
I don't know. Let's see. We're still launching it. Yeah.
Leading to the fundraising, I know Shilpa is quite interested in at some stage, and I'm sorry, you have told me this privately, so that she wants to at some stage kind of start fundraising. And what I see when I talk to female entrepreneurs, they kind of have sleepless nights with fundraising. They want to be a little more organic.
Yes.
And I was talking to more of my friends who are part of WLC on fundraising. They've reached a top line of 10, 20 crore. They had a whole call with a private equity advisor coming on the call. We had a casual call and he said, if we get an investor, what happens? If we don't get an investor, what happens? What do you sign off? What autonomy you lose? And I'm really happy. I want to ask Shilpa and then of course you, that what happens and what questions are you have in your mind when you're doing fundraising? And what is holding you back?
So I haven't gone out fundraising yet, although I have been getting sleepless nights from my husband who's forcing me to go out and raise funds. And I just feel I'm not ready.
I can
right
see
now.
that.
He's like, what are you like? Because again, they're only thinking big, right? And I'm like, is it slow and steady that wins the race? Should I just, first have the proof of the pudding? And Kapil's like, you've got the proof of the pudding, now go out and raise. And then you expand and then you pump in the money. And, very interestingly, by the way, my startup is very unique in the sense that most companies today are spending a lot of their money trying to acquire customers. So the cost of acquisition of a customer is the highest for most organizations. In my case, it's different because I'm actually making money while I'm acquiring customers.
Amazing.
So it's a very unique situation. And Karan thinks it's such a strong point that I should just go out, raise funds, and then acquire even bigger market, and then go out full guns. But honestly, there are 2 things which is holding me back. and I would hate to say this on camera because if he hears it, he's going to really like kill me someday. But one is that I don't know, like I just feel that it's so passion driven right now. So by the way, it's not an NGO. It is purpose before profit. So we are very clear that, and when you're looking at investors, they're only looking at how much money is the organization making. So their focus is profit. So I'm just worried that will I get distracted in order to give them the return that they want? If I take their money, will I be forced to get distracted from my purpose? So that is something which is one of the prime things that is holding me back from going out and raising fund. And the second thing is I just sometimes wonder, like I'm comfortable. I don't need that money.
Yeah.
But of course I will, if I get an investor, I will get the right kind of, expertise on board. They can help me. I'll get direction. I'll get better processes in place. So I know it's a trade-off, but sometimes I feel, will I sell myself too short? Do I like get to a certain place and then, raise funds? So those are the two reasons why I've been avoiding this question completely. So
I think that's a very, very interesting point. And I think the answer is getting to a point where you're comfortable and getting the right investor on board. So I think I spent a lot of time focusing on the kind of investor that I wanted. It was tough to think of it that way because when you're a startup, you say, what am I? I haven't done anything.
Right.
Where am I going to have an opinion on which investor I want in?
Right.
And I'm so thankful I did that in my first fund, right? So I did not raise money from any high net worth individuals. I only raised money from institutions. And in fact, one of my peers came and said, how did you raise all this money from institutions? And I said, because I'm a mom. And when I say that in this group, you understand what I mean.
Right.
And he thought I was being a little bit too, extra smart or something. And he said, oh, I'm a father. I'm like, it's not the same.
It's not the same.
So, but no woman, every time I've told a woman this or a mother this, they totally get it. But I'm digressing to come back to your point, Shilpa. Get it to a point where you're comfortable, and also get the right investor in. Because there are many investors, and let's say you don't get that right investor in today, because maybe that investor needs a certain scale. So let's say, for example, maybe it's an impact fund. Right? And so what do you need to do for the building blocks to get that impact fund over a period of time? Is the way I would look at it.
No, that's very, very good.
Because you may not want that extremely aggressive venture capitalist who wants you to take the business in this direction, which may not be the direction that you want to take. Right? And there's so many ways to add value. Absolutely.
Also,
so many ways to build value.
I think all of us have this innate, really like what you call a gut instinct. You have to trust that instinct. I think you'll know when the fit is right and when the time is right. That's always, I think it just innately, right now you're not feeling it. It's quite evident, so today, obviously this is not the right time, but, maybe a year out or 2 years out, you might feel very differently.
But I will say kudos to you. And I totally agree with Karan that if you're actually making money while you're building and your unit economics are strong, that's very unique.
Yeah.
That is very unique.
It also, sometimes I get confused.
Yeah.
I, again, being that typical woman who's trying to mitigate risk.
Yeah.
Am I not like looking at the larger picture? So these are the.
But I feel the larger picture. What if you had like a really large and prestigious impact fund down the road? What are the building blocks to get that and making sure that happens?
Correct.
So
and don't forget, it's early days for you. You're 2 years old.
We were discussing about risk and women's ability to manage risk. And, one of the authors said very well that when you are starting out, remember you have to manage risk, but also take risk. And I think somewhere Shilpa's journey is right there. How do you manage risk, but take risk and take those big leaps into, maybe getting an investor, expanding? How do you kind of balance this, especially with you? You are investing in companies and you're taking risk because you're not in the secondary market. You're coming unlisted space. And it's an interesting piece, and to see you do this so well, I'm sure some of our female founders would love to know that how do you balance managing but taking? It's very polarized.
In my business, it's all about ensuring that you have the right process. But process is what allows you to manage the risk, but maybe not bring in the really big wins, right? So it's almost like you have two parts of your brain that are working together. And that's needed for not just as a woman, but just in general in private equity, to succeed in private equity, right? Because if you are out there with the part of your brain that only thinks about how big this can be and you're blind to the risk, you can fail spectacularly. And if you are only sort of focused on the risk, you're going to have a ho-hum fund, which is going to be all right. You're not going to lose money for people, but they're not going to get excited about it, right? So so it's an art and a science, right? It's process, but you have to keep telling yourself that, I'm going to go for the big wins.
Correct.
I also wanted to ask all of you this question around challenge. Did you face, I'll start with you, Shilpa, did you face in your journey till now with Fitistan sort of a challenge where you were really, I think you really struggled to overcome, but you stayed the course?
So interestingly, my business partner is also a male, but very different male from what I was used to. So Karan he's extremely calm. I can proudly say that I could be the only woman who's been married now for 20 plus years and Karan's never screamed at me, never lost his cool on me. So we've never had a fight because...
We're going to need to have him on this episode. It's like, who is this amazing human being?
Extremely calm as a person.
Yeah.
So I'm very used to a certain male persona around me. That was my conditioned response to a male environment, right? And then my partner in my business is ex-special forces. He's a doctor. He's gone to Kashmir and he's worked with 3 presidents of our country. He's actually gone and fought terrorists. He's got injured. He's killed people. So he comes from a very different conditioning. So one of the initial challenges when both of us started working together, so we both were principally aligned. We both brought 2 different skill sets on the table. We had the same, so we thought it was a great partnership. But it was so difficult initially to work with him because he had a certain style of working and I was not used to that style. I'm like, you can't talk to me like this. You can't be, I wouldn't even have the courage to tell him that, listen, I can't be listening to this. But I think over a period of time, I also realized that it was his conditioning. And he also realized that, he's in a very different environment. This is not Kashmir. This is not a battleground. We are in Bombay. We are in a corporate office. So I think he changed his way and I changed my sensitivity to this. Like I stopped taking everything on face value and I'm like, okay, I understand. So I think I became more accepting of the situation. So honestly, I know that your question was more about did Fitistan face any struggle? But me personally, just to align with him was my biggest struggle. And I'm very thankful to God that we both have found like a middle ground. And it has been transformative. It's changed both of us by leaps and bounds. So it's been a personal growth story in that sense.
Amazing.
Jaya, what about you?
Yeah, so I think I'm running a peer-led organization. So it's outstanding alpha women who are all equal. And I think one of the biggest challenges that happens is how do you manage stakeholders who are your peers? And everybody comes with and it's of course very inspiring to have them, but they all have different viewpoints. So one of the biggest challenges for me is when to listen to them and when to listen to my own voice. And a lot of advice comes your way. And I think to hone into your own voice, because ultimately, like it or not, even if it's a peer-led organization, ultimately it comes down to you being your baby and it's your vision. So I think that in the last 2 years since I started piloting is that when to know you hold your own confidence and it's an everyday battle, and when to take advice. So I think I wrote a LinkedIn post, Suno sabki karo apni.
What about you, Shivani?
I've had a wonderful and dramatic startup challenge. So I talked about how I raised all this money from institutions. And when I started, I'll go back to the story about how I spoke to 3 men who were wonderful men. And they congratulate me every day now. But anyway, the ones who said,
don't start.
And, so they all gave me various different reasons as to why I should not start, right? So, of course, one said, you're never going to be able to raise the money. The second said, you're never going to be able to get a team that sticks around. And the third said, you're not going to be able to get a portfolio. Okay, so on these 3, I managed to raise money from the institutions that I wanted to. The average tenure of my senior team is 9 years.
Wow.
Okay, and touch wood, my portfolio is rocking. Okay, so these 3 are there. What nobody ever warned me against was that one of my investors can go bust.
Wow.
This was, again, like a strange and shock and awe moment for me. So one of my early investors, who had sort of a sizable commitment in my fund, went through a financially challenged time and was not able to honor their commitment to the fund. And the fund is a pooled concept, right? So when you draw money from, let's say, several institutions and one of them doesn't give you the money, you're in deep trouble in various ways, right? Because you have a commitment outstanding to a portfolio company, but also the others are saying, hey, what's going on? And so I engineered one of the first secondary deals in the market. In fact, IIFL Wealth came in for a period, right? And so that was incredible. And so I echo everything Shilpa is saying about Karan. Of course, I have experienced his calm demeanor and his ability to spot an opportunity. And was very grateful that, Karan saw this and IIFL Wealth Management came in and took over a secondary position. But it was very stressful for me those days. I mean, I lost my voice for about a month. I couldn't speak because it was just, imagine all these banks that you've raised money from and you call them and you say they have, there's this challenge and they've never heard of this challenge before.
Right.
Wow.
So, and they're not, sitting there saying, oh, don't worry, it'll be fine. Right. But of course, I mean, it was fine eventually. So, yeah.
So I think that's brilliant to what you went through and how you manage your fear. So I had a similar moment, but I want to ask this question and you've seen a lot of aggressive investors coming in and how companies lose direction. Yeah. And when you're negotiating these transactions every day, and a lot of time, very powerful investors come with terms which are not good for you. And you are sitting...
You mean to the startups?
Yes, to the startups. Maybe Series 2 funding, Series 3 funding, when you're exiting majority, and you're sitting with some old terms that you want to exit, but you also have very powerful investors who come with a lot of money, and they become a little bit of a bully sometimes, right? And these are hard times. And you're wanting to raise capital, you're also running balance sheet, you're maybe have only 6 months of salary in your bank. And you've seen a lot of stories happen where companies have gone bankrupt overnight because an investor took them in a different direction. Yeah. And this is my question here, that is it all fair and love and war that you have a powerful investor who comes and kind of sways your way? Do you give in? Do you negotiate better? How do you negotiate a good transaction? Because I know in term sheet, one of the hardest challenges why women don't raise capital early on is I don't know what kind of investor I'll get and what will he make me sign on a term sheet and what will I lose. I'd rather grow slow and organic. So how do you manage that early investors, get the right investors in, negotiate the right terms so that you have your vision intact?
I think it's a great question, Jaya. I think as a founder, like I was telling Shilpa, you should do a lot of work as to the kind of investor that you want. And there's enough people, there's enough of an ecosystem out there where you can actually do reference calls. Lots of the companies that we've invested in have done tons of reference calls before deciding to move in a certain direction. I think success happens when there is alignment. So there has to be alignment between the investors that come into India Alternatives and alignment between India Alternatives and the companies that we invest in. I think in the last several years, there has been a very big problem because what's happened in the height of the bull market is, and you talked about a certain thing as to how do you get the right investor, and I'll give you the investor's perspective on that also, is that oftentimes what happens is you have these very grandiose, promoters who are not able to see the risk, by the way, okay? And so therefore are not pricing in the risk of what can happen in their business because, of course, you can have an upside case, you can have a base case, you can have a downside case. And sometimes in that market, we've lost out on deals where we've said that, listen, this valuation is completely insane. There's no way we're going to make money on this deal, right? So I'm going to walk away. And by the way, they got funded by very big brand names. It did happen. But the problem that happens is, like in my business, it's almost like you get married for 5 years. Right? For 5 years, you are together. You are supporting each other. And after 5 years, you need to exit because my investors need their cash out, right? And if there's a lack of alignment from the get-go, it becomes very difficult to be successful. So if you, as an investor, have paid a valuation that you're very uncomfortable with, then you see the stories that you're talking about. Because then you're more panicked that the company isn't growing as fast as you would have wanted it to, Why? Because you have an investor breathing down your neck and you don't know. And if something goes haywire, you've got to get the money out in 5 years, right? So, but if you have a reasonable person on the other side who says, listen, I'm also building it for the longer run, right? And I'm not necessarily going to choose an investor based on the highest price. Sometimes you have wonderful success stories, right?
Just tying in what Shilpa said earlier, that should I get in? So, in just like a short way, what are the pros and cons of getting investors? Like if you get it in 3 or 5 years, and today a lot, because of there's so much private equity money available, people are earlier, SMEs used to take 50 years to grow. We have those nice people. People took very long time to become a 500 crore company. Now a 500 crore company happens in 5-10 years.
Yeah.
So what is a pro and con of getting an investor? Good or bad, that's the second stage. But what is for women founders to start raising capital in the 3rd or the 5 year, 50, what are the pros and cons of getting an investor?
I would say my answer is not all investors are equal, just like not all companies are equal, right? And so the challenge is that when you're a young company and you're thinking like, I'm so small, my goodness, and how lucky I am that this investor is ready to give me money, take a step back and force yourself to say, but I'm not always going to be small, right? True. And so 5 years from now, when I'm this big, is this the investor that I'm going to be proud to have by my side? Right? And that's a challenge. And sometimes that's a bit of a challenge for women. Because like I said, my own story, I was completely astonished when somebody was ready to, put this money down. And so that's where we have to push ourselves and say, hey, we are going to be much bigger, right? And since we're going to be much bigger, what's the quality of investor that we want? And we are not men. So what we may want 5 years, the big picture for us may be different than what a male founder will have. So maybe the big picture for us is that really high quality institutional investor, right?
I think one word that we haven't used in this conversation is ambition.
Yeah.
And I think the answer to your questions, Jaya, really are about ambition. Maybe right now, my ambition is to, just get to year 5 in my startup. And that's fine. And my ambition is to be 1,000 CR fund, do 1,000 CR raise, by next year. And my ambition is to have, coaching, maybe 10 really amazing C-suite people, and then also building WLC or passion project into something really major. And maybe for me, my passion project is, to make sure Circle as a podcast really goes places. So, I think the point is that all of this is really the first question you have to figure out is, what your ambition is. And then you sort of base it off of that.
Yeah. So I think, it's such rich experience. I think among the 4 of us, we have about 80-90 years of experience. So I would love to ask this advice from each one of you. And you've all taken such beautiful pivots, including journalism, private equity, a purpose-driven organization. What's the advice you would give to women who are starting out now, both professionally, as female founders? What's the 2, 3 advice that you could give to them right now?
Shilpa, do you want to?
I have 2 with my personal experience. One is, so one of our taglines at Fitistan is Rukna Mana Hai, which means no stopping. And so we as women, like my advice is that don't just keep watching the clock. Do what the clock does, which is keep going. So that is my advice. And the second advice is that a lot of times we hesitate to ask. And in my experience, when you go out and ask, 9 out of 10 times the answer is yes. Yeah. But if you don't go and ask, 10 out of 10 times the answer is no. So just go out and ask.
My advice would be, I think that we have a lot of inherent skills, right? And we have a lot of natural strengths. And what sometimes happens is, especially if you're in a male-dominated industry, you think in order to be successful, you need to be more like a man. But in fact, you don't. So like in my industry, I feel women have a natural advantage because we often fall less prey to confirmation bias. Many bad investments happen not because the man across the table is not super smart, not super sharp, not well educated. Of course they all are in my industry, right? It's often confirmation bias. I've made up my mind and everything that I see is going to support that. And whereas a woman comes to the table saying, I'm not so sure. And in my industry, that's a beautiful thing. Because when she says, I'm not so sure, means she's actually, every time she has an investment thesis, But she comes to the table with an open mind saying, hey, this data supports what I was thinking, but this data is not supporting it. So let me rethink it. And then she'll speak to a couple of colleagues and say, hey, I came away from the meeting thinking this. What did you think, Gayatri? And I'll actually listen to what you're saying.
Yeah.
Not just, the perfunctory,
made up your mind.
whatever, I made up my mind. And so that allows us to be naturally good at my industry. So therefore, I would say my advice to young women who would want to get into fund management or my industry and be, on my side of the table is use your natural strengths. Don't try to become like a man to succeed. You don't need to do that, right?
My advice would be to stay the course. As I said earlier, life is not like, this huge, big picture doesn't happen like right away. Every single day you're putting one foot forward in front of the other and just staying the course. And I would just say that there are many times in your life when you feel like you want to give up either on the job or whatever it is you're facing. Don't just think hard about it, because you may think that is the right solution, but maybe a year down the line you might regret that. And then maybe that opportunity won't come back to you. So, I would say stay the course. That's number one. Just show up. So much of life is just about showing up. 90% of it is that. And the second thing I would also say is don't neglect yourself, because this is something that women tend to do a lot. We we have families and all that, so we always put ourselves last. I would say, and we're seeing the data is actually pretty scary in India, even in terms of women's health. So I would say just make sure that you're taking care of yourself in whatever way you can, whether it means taking that 20-minute walk a day or whatever. That's not necessarily professional, but it'll help you completely, physically as well as mentally.
So I'll answer this question for myself because I'm the most recent entrepreneur. I think I read it somewhere that becoming a founder is like jumping off a building and making an aeroplane on the way down. And I think I've really felt it. And I think if you're able to do that, be adaptive. I think hold a vision, but don't get conformed with the way the vision will get executed. And every morning I get up and there's always something that's not going right in life. And I read this book called Obstacle is the Way. And it's got brilliant chapters on how the only way is through. And you just keep, as Gayatri brilliantly said, just put your foot in front of the other, because you will never find easy answers. And every day will, for the first few years, feel like, even the wins you can't celebrate because there's always a little something failing. And in many books it was quoted by one of the entrepreneurs. He said that big or small companies are large kiosks, functioning kiosks, and get comfortable with things not in control, things not going the way you want. While you will feel like it's very process oriented, but somewhere something is not going the way it is, and get comfortable with uncertainty, with dealing with not having all the answers. And the second thing I think, which has really made me a coach, and I really support people to do and want to do that for all the founders at WLC, is that early on get them mentors and sponsors. I think a mentor is a nice feeling, like you feel cushioned and supported, your back feels supported. And at WLC we were very fortunate to get a mentor. And just knowing sometimes that you have a mentor and you have a great bunch of peers who are rooting for you. I think today morning I sent a message to 5-6 of the oldest gang of girls who came together to make WLC. Thank you for supporting me. Just knowing that you have unflinching support of few people is outstanding. So cultivate those relationships.
Amazing. Lovely.
Yeah, that's a nice way to end things.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies. That was lovely. I enjoyed it so much.
Really so much fun.
Really fun.
It was hard to watch. I didn't feel anything else.
That's really natural.
So good.
Thank you for listening to Circle. Remember, your dreams may evolve,
But the drive to achieve them remains constant.
stay connected,
Stay inspired, stay the course.
and keep leading the way. Until next time.